Welcome everyone. Welcome again to this ShareCafe Hidden Gems webinar. Just a little bit of housekeeping from last week before we get started. For those advisors looking for your CPD certificates will be sent out today. The Stockbrokers Association had their conference all week. Now, for those of you who would like to ask questions today, don't put your hand up. We can't see that. There's a Q&A box. Type in the questions and we'll get to those when we can. Now, this week we are talking exclusively biotechs. Now, we all know this is a complicated sector. It's difficult to understand. It's a sector of high risk and high rewards. So first up, we have a keynote presentation from Platinum International Healthcare Fund Portfolio Manager, Dr. Bianca Ogden. Now, Bianca has been prominent in the press, global press recently. She's been sought after for her opinion on COVID, so we're very fortunate to have her time. Prior to joining Platinum in 2003, Bianca spent some time at Swiss pharmaceuticals giant Novartis, researching new HIV drugs, one of which was approved and is in use today. Her rich knowledge in this sector is of real value today. We're looking at her knowledge base in molecular biology. She has first-hand insights into the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, which give her a unique insight into the fundamentals of healthcare companies and identifying those with solid foundations in scientific research. Her fund has produced a 10.5% return since inception. It's closer to 16.9% return over the last 10 years. What a perfectly qualified person we have today to discuss biotech, markets, and of course, COVID. Over to you. Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you very much, Tim, for the introduction. That's great. I didn't have to have one of the slides if I would have known, but that's okay. Look, I'm really excited to talk about innovation in healthcare, so I'm very passionate about it. And one of the analogies that I currently make to people, because everyone always tells me how great tech is, biotech is as exciting, if not more, really. And I think everyone that wants to invest should really have a little bit of that or even more in their portfolio, not just the Teslas or the Apples of the world. I think biotech is really the next decade's kind of golden era. Anyway, so what do I do and my team? So what we do every day, we're not really that much different to a pharma or device executive. So because of what we do is we scour the world every day for new opportunities, and particular opportunities that are a bit out there, that are different and that are really highly innovative. So we don't really want another Me Too or something else. We really want companies that have great management teams that are really pushing the boundaries. And what we also do is we try and really map out the next kind of decade. What really will healthcare look like in 10 years? And those things involve virtual medicine and you name it, synthetic biology, all of that we try to really understand and get to know. But on the other hand, when you look at different jurisdictions around the world, they're all quite different. So we've recently, on the last probably 2 years, done a lot of work in China, trying to understand the emerging biotech landscape over there. And that's quite exciting because most people say, oh, they're just copycats and, you know, the technology isn't there yet. But to be honest, they're actually quite advanced and to some degree actually further advanced than some others because they use the newest technology in manufacturing. They use the newest kind of ideas that are out there and really turn them quite quickly into something viable. So we're quite excited and we've been increasing our exposure to that sector in recent months. But what I want to do today is to talk to you a little bit about what technologies we look at and how we do that and why we're so excited about that, and also explain to you a little bit the process that we go through. Next slide, please. Oh no, that was the other one, sorry. That was just an introduction of myself, who I am. So as Tim has done that already, I'm basically a molecular scientist by training. I grew up in Germany. I'm German by birth and still German. I've joined Platinum about 17 years ago, so I don't have any financial training. I essentially learned that at Platinum, and I worked as a virologist, and little did I know that skill comes in very handy in the last 9 months, so that's great. But let's look at biotech. So biotech, as Tim said, is quite daunting. It is a field that is full of jargon, and sometimes I feel that scientists make it a bit harder than it actually should be. So there's a lot of vocabulary that one has to learn, but once someone has managed that, it's actually not as daunting. But what I find when we, for example, meet companies, we went on a trip last year to Boston, met about 35 companies, and all of them start off with, we are the leader in XYZ. Now, that's kind of common sense, tells you that that's not the case, but people like to do that. So for us, it's very important to really dissect and go deep into these companies and understand what they really have. And that's kind of what we do. And if you look at the breadth and depth that's out there at the moment in biotech, just a number that recently came out is there is about 650 listed US companies in biotech. You can essentially double that if you look at the private sector. And to me, if you really want to be serious about biotech, you do have to understand the biotech, both private and listed, because the private ones are almost more interesting than the listed ones, because that's really where the newest innovation happens. So we try and cover them all, and then we also look at it globally. So we never have a dull moment, and we work quite hard to achieve that. But one of the other things that I always like to say is, look, there's a framework that's overreaching all of this, and that's the framework here on the slide. And let's start on the bottom. So the holy grail in this sector is really to prevent a disease. That's really what we want. And if we can't totally prevent it, we really want to detect it as early as possible. And then what we really want to give just a one-off drug and cure a disease. Now, we're obviously not there yet, but to me, this is a journey, and we're essentially on the bus to get to this destination. And we're really working hard to find the technology that we need to get there. And that gets me then to the other two pillars that we really look at, which is diagnostic, which is very important to us. And we feel that that's really a key in all of healthcare, because if you have great tools that detect something as early as possible, or screening or monitoring it, you actually have done quite a good job, and monitoring and tracing as well. And we see that now with the coronavirus outbreak or pandemic, that testing is really the holy grail. And the other part, obviously, we need treatment. And here I mean devices and biotech. And I think the treatment has expanded massively. So there's something, I always look at the tools that you use to treat a disease, and that toolbox has expanded massively. So while we all know, you know, a Panadol or a Nurofen, I think there's so many other, I call them modalities or tools, modalities out there that are very different, that really go to the core of what's happening in diseases. So it's like gene therapy, gene editing, RNA interference, all sorts of different things. And over time, maybe synthetic biology that will help us to really cure diseases over time. Next slide, please. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll run you through one of the two examples that highlight what we do and how we invest. So in the first one is all about the humble molecule that is the messenger RNA. Now, what is messenger RNA? You may have read it in the paper, because it somehow has shot to fame in the last 9 months. We have been for a couple of years looking at this space for a while. And basically what mRNA is, a clever molecule. We all have it. We all need it to basically survive. So if we look at this, this chart, or this schematic from that I kind of took off the Moderna website, is so you've got your storage, your genetic storage material, which is your DNA that stores all your genes and your genomic information. And then on the right hand, you have the proteins. And proteins are essentially what we're all made of. And proteins are also the components that signal within our cells, different kind of, you know, growth signals or death signals really, but they're essential to who we are. But how does it get from our genes to this protein? You need this mRNA, which is the messenger that takes a copy of your DNA, and then essentially this copy gets sent to the protein manufacturing sites within our body, within our cells, and they then know what to do with it and produce these proteins according to this blueprint. Now, Moderna, cleverly, they're very good at marketing and sending a great message. They say, well, you've got storage, software, and application. And software is the mRNA. The great thing is now, if you think about it, in diseases, a lot of the proteins basically fail. They don't do what they're supposed to do. They're sometimes not even there. So what you want to do is you want to correct that. And how good would it be if you could just inject this mRNA, like a little molecule, into the humans, and the human itself is the manufacturing side. So the concept is not actually that difficult, but the execution is very difficult, because the mRNA, if you inject it into a person or into an animal, that doesn't like it. It basically wants to destroy it. It sees it as toxic. It just wants to get rid of it. So that doesn't really work. But what has happened the last couple of years, money has been spent to understand how to deliver it, how to manufacture it better, and what to do with it. And we've been following that space for quite some time, and we went out the way we do it. We then go and visit these companies, talk to the scientists, talk to the management, visit the manufacturing side, do all of that, and really understand what's going on, and is this really feasible? And so we did that with Moderna. We have another company called Biotech as well, a German mRNA company. And we really liked what we saw, and really liked the excitement from the management team. And both companies were quite well funded, had great investors. And so we decided to invest in them. So we invested into Moderna at the IPO, and we invested into Biotech pre-IPO. Now, what we saw in this technology is basically a disruptor, a basic disruptor that will go in and say, okay, the old way of making things is good, but this is much better. You can scale it, it's cheaper, and it's much faster because you know the DNA sequence. And that's what attracted us to it. And we thought, particularly in vaccine development, that will have quite an impact. Now, in the end, the hypothesis has played out probably a lot faster than we could have even imagined, but we still believe that this technology has a long way to go. Now I go to the next idea, next slide please, which goes to detection. Now, detection, as I said, it would be the holy grail to prevent something and to detect something really early on. And one of the things that we've been looking at trying to find is detection methodologies that really push the limit of detection. And so we're looking at a lot of different diagnostic companies, technology companies. In diagnostic, usually technologies come out of normal lab, like research labs that develop it, and then they move into the diagnostic sector. And one company that we've had investments since 2017 is a US biotech called Quanterix. Now, we knew the CEO there quite well from a previous investment in one of his companies. And so we kept in touch and made sure that we understand what he's doing now. So he's very commercial, operational. When you look at this slide, on the top right corner, you see basically there's your brain and a cancer. And usually when those diseases get detected, it's very late in the game. And you're essentially already quite down the line, and you wish you could have detected it earlier, but the problem is that we don't have the technologies to do that. Same with heart disease, a little better, we can measure cholesterol and different other things if we go to screens. But the idea would really be, how good would it be if we could just screen something and really find the minute changes that happen in blood, in saliva and urine, like easy to sample samples basically. And that's what Quanterix is doing. It really is looking at these technologies. And what we also liked, it's one of the founders of this company also founded Illumina, the sequencing company, so the pedigree is there. We met them again, we visited them, we looked at what they do, we spoke to customers that use the technology. And what this company does is they also have these summits where they get all the customers together and then basically talk about the challenges that they have and what they do. So at the moment, they're focusing a lot on neurology. So they're looking at brain health, and they say, well, there's this marker called neurofilament. And they say, if we have such a marker, and if we can detect that early, we can detect Alzheimer's early, we can get MS earlier, we can take Huntington, we can see if a drug works. So there's immense opportunity in that. But what has to happen initially is that the technology is great and can be as great, but if you don't have something that you actually detect that someone wants, it doesn't really work. And that's something where then great management come in, who then build the clinical knowledge around that. And that's what this company is doing at the moment. They're also involved in looking at a detection method for the coronavirus. So they moved into that quite quickly. So we're quite excited about this company, and to us, it's about the long term. Yeah, they will keep raising money, sure, but in the end, there is a huge opportunity for this company if it's managed the correct way. So while I then will leave you, because with my last slide, next slide, please. So this is the this is I leave you with the slide. That's basically the Platinum International Healthcare Fund from inception until today, the performance. So I hope that you are as excited, or got you as excited about this space as I am, because I think it is much better than tech, really.
Thank you, Bianca. Thanks for a great presentation and a really timely topic, obviously. In that regard, let's take one question on COVID. I mean, is it a global race to one cure where there will be one winner? You know, I notice the US government is funding some of these companies with, you know, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. Yeah. And this is happening around the globe. How do you see this playing out from a cure perspective?
Look, I think on the vaccine side, that's obviously what makes the biggest headlines, and the big money allocations are being spent at the moment. So one company can't make all the allocations for everyone. It's impossible, the logistical experience, and to actually securing all of that. I think there will be different players. I think they, and interestingly, they all work together. There is on the drug side, there are several players. For example, several different companies have basically teamed up and say, look, we've got to mobilize this together, because it's a big task that we have to do. And often it comes back down to how do you manufacture such big amounts of what you really need and then really deploy it. So on the vaccine side, for example, it comes back down to the stoppers of your vial, or the glass components that you need to do, and then how do you ship it at the right temperatures to different, obviously, climates. So I never believe in one winner takes it all, because I think in this field it's too complex that to happen. There's maybe one incumbent and the other one comes in. I think the interesting part to me is the part that the mRNA is playing in the vaccine field, and that about 9 months ago, as I've been told by some old style vaccine to not care about mRNA. So I think they changed their mind now. So it's that exciting to see a new technology to really push its limits.
And just broadly speaking, what's your time frame for investment, given the commercialization of a drug takes so long to play out?
Look, we have a very long-term mindset, and by what I mean, so in drug development, while some people believe now it's all going straight up and it's all looking really good, usually things fall over. And sometimes that presents a really great opportunity to get back in, and other times maybe they have to regroup and it takes a bit longer. But we have things in the portfolio that we had probably since inception. So it is a long-term game, and you essentially go on a journey and you manage these the positions. And what we do, what I try to highlight, is we really try to understand the companies, the management, what is really core to them. And over time, what I felt is, to be honest, a lot of companies, very rare that a company, particularly in the US, goes out of business in this space. They tend to reinvent themselves. And if the good teams that are out there, they just keep doing this over and over again. So it's fascinating. And
there's some questions specifically about Australian stocks, which I won't go into, but from an Australian biotech company perspective, how do they compare on a kind of global stage, and do you spend time looking at Australian companies?
We actually, so the Health Fund in particular has quite a couple of biotechs. I think it's public knowledge, some of them. Look, I think one of the biggest issues here, or challenge, we can call it issue, is the funding environment, because particularly in America, the amount that gets raised so quickly, it is very hard, even if you have the best drug here or best technology, to compete. It's very hard, because they very quickly raise 50, 100 million, and that's very difficult in Australia. So that's, to me, always the biggest hurdle, is the funding, and can you push things as fast as they can in the US and in Europe. So that's a challenge. But I think the science, there's great science here. We try and support some of that, but then in the end, one of the issues we have is they need to do bigger funding rounds to then move to the next step, and that's unfortunately mostly overseas.
Okay, Bianca, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. A great presentation, and we'll see you again, hopefully.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have genetic signatures, ASX code GSS. market cap of 328 million. It's got a 1-year return of 109%. The company is a global leader in the supply of molecular diagnostic solutions. It's a specialist molecular diagnostics company focused on the development and commercialization of its proprietary platform technology, Freebase. It's also released a suite of real-time PCR-based products, which I'm sure we'll get an explanation of, for the routine detection of infectious diseases under the Easy Screen brand. The COVID pandemic has created an opportunity for GSS to accelerate international expansion and increase customer acquisition. They're making rapid progress in bringing COVID tests to the international market. We have with us the CEO, John Melky. John's got over 20 years experience in this space, including 7 years of work in laboratories and 13 years of experience in sales and marketing. He joined Genetic Signatures in 2003. And since then has commercialized 4 research-based products and 7 diagnostic products. John, thanks for your time. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Tim. Really my pleasure to tell you a little bit more about Genetic Signatures. Excellent introduction. It made my job easier. We are a revenue stage healthcare company which is focused on the detection of infectious diseases. So infectious diseases are of interest to us because they're a leading cause of death, but they're potentially preventable with better diagnostic assays. So we have developed our own proprietary technology called Freebase. It is been developed over more than a decade. It is now a trusted and proven technology that is out in testing labs around the world with 100% customer retention since 2016. The core technology, Freebase, does give us some competitive advantages because of the way we've employed it into our testing protocols. We've designed this to be very high throughput, allowing labs to do thousands of samples a day, but also don't compromise on the number of targets that we pick up per sample, per clinical sample. You rightly said, being a manufacturer of infectious disease detection kits in a pandemic is a busy time for us. We've certainly leveraged our capabilities to develop a test for SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. And we did that quite quickly and scaled up manufacturing quite quickly to meet the significant demand. And that has played well into our global expansion strategy, where we are taking our homegrown success into those much larger markets of Europe and the US. And certainly our COVID detection kit has resulted in increased recognition, creating new avenues for us to expand our customer base. It's a relatively simple business model. We design and develop and manufacture kits, in kitted form, which are sold to pathology laboratories who use our kits on patient clinical samples that come through to interrogate whether there's an infectious agent present, and then report back to the doctor to help them make a diagnosis. We do have multiple catalysts coming up in the coming year, which I'll take you through, each representing potential upside as we go through. So the next slide is really just to show the outstanding year that we have had. It is against the backdrop of the pandemic, but we have been rewarded with a positive share price performance, and you can see the 12-month performance there with the key milestones embedded over that graph. We are certainly more interested in what's to come. Our focus is on the current financial year and the coming 12 months, where we are on track to report sales growth in the current quarter of at least 25% above our previous quarter, which itself was a record quarter. We are focused on driving customer acquisitions throughout Europe and our market entry into the biggest market in the world, the North American market, and focused on launching new Easy Screen products that use our Freebase technology, expanding that product suite as we continue to scale manufacturing to meet the demand. So the next slide will take you through our revenue for the last 4 years, where you can see a 59% CAGR. That was the last quarter that I was referring to of that $7 million, a record quarter for us. It's 351% up on the previous corresponding quarter, but annually as well, we had a record year of, we've just reported this morning, 11.3 million, which is 131% increase on the prior year. Certainly, the rapid development of the COVID detection kit has driven that, but has opened up those offshore markets or accelerated that interest that we're getting with about 10% of our annual revenue coming from offshore customers. Certainly have increased our manufacturing capacity, which has resulted in that record quarter. We continue to raise our manufacturing capacity, which is why we're confident we'll have at least a 25% increase on the prior quarter. And we continue to ramp up as we go forward. So the next slide will just give you a little bit more detail on our financials. As I said, we have released that this morning. We've covered revenue. You can see on the expense line that we have certainly increased our investment into personnel, and this is across our teams in Europe and the US, and locally across all of our functions. We've certainly invested in our development of a test for COVID-19. And we are also investing in the clinical trials that we are performing as part of an FDA clearance for our Enteric protozoan kit. So the net loss was 2.1, which was an improvement over the last year. However, it's really the impact of higher sales is evident in the second half, where we reported a maiden profit of 0.3 million, really reflecting the uptick in revenue. Cash balance is strong, 31 million, really allowing us to execute our expansion strategy with confidence. So the next slide will give you a little bit more information about the kits. They are in kitted form. As I said, the business model is relatively simple. We sell these kits to pathology labs who use them on clinical samples that come through the door every day, and these can run into the many thousands, especially during the pandemic. And these kits can detect whether viral infections, protozoan infections, bacterial infections. We do this on equipment that already exists in the laboratories, but we also develop our own equipment in collaboration with the leading robotic manufacturers around the world. And these give us a tremendous throughput where we can do approximately 200 patient samples in about 4 hours through to result, and can reload that machine every 2 hours. The next slide will show you the groups of kit that we manufacture and supply. We have an Enteric Kit, which picks up over 20 causes of gastroenteritis. Respiratory kits, which does include our test for COVID-19 and 15 other viruses. We have tests for the superbugs, which you would have heard about, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which are predicted to be a leading cause of death over the coming years. Kits for sexually transmitted infections and mosquito-borne infections. We have kits for meningitis and atypical respiratory in development. Taken together, a global market of approximately 10 billion per annum. Given the pandemic, I've created the next slide just to give you a snapshot or an insight into how we approach this. We designed the test to be used as a standalone test, which looks for the presence of the virus that causes COVID-19, but it can also be used as an add-on to existing customers who are already using our respiratory screen. Our Core 3-based technology, which I won't go into today, does give us an advantage over other tests because it gives us a resistance to the genetic drift or the mutation rates that occur in viruses, and certainly the COVID-19 virus has been reported to be mutating quite significantly. In terms of a summary, we have sought and received regulatory approvals in Europe and Australia, and those kits are currently being sold into those regions. We have prepared an EUA, Emergency Use Authorization application with the US FDA, and we are waiting for clearance for that. However, we are now in a position where we can sell to select customers in the US under an exemption, a 4C exemption, which exists for those manufacturers who have put in an application and the FDA has deemed them to be of suitable quality, and we are intending on supplying under that exemption. I'm sure most have heard there are certainly there are constraints in supply. We have been very focused on making sure none of our customers run out of product, and we can proudly claim that none of our customers have been without product to date, which is a fairly significant achievement given the logistic issues facing the world at the moment. So the next slide is really showing part of the reason we're getting such good traction, and it's really the competitive advantage that we have. So patients certainly benefit from our test. They are receiving a test that screens for multiple targets in about 4 hours. Laboratories are benefiting from our high throughput protocols and minimized hands-on time. And governments and payers are also benefiting from reduced hospital stays, reducing the spread of diseases. The next slide is really just highlighting that scalable nature of our product. We gain high throughput customers who generally, once they commit to you, will test every sample that comes through the door with your test. So very sticky revenue, similar to that printer and cartridge model, especially when we supply equipment. And you can see that as our revenue has tracked since listing quarter on quarter as we introduce new tests and introduce new customers. The next slide is really just a summary of our global expansion. North America, as I have said, we have submitted our EUA and now can supply under that 4C exemption. Europe and Australia, we have regulatory approvals for 4 of our kits, including the kit for COVID-19. And we do have additional products coming through the regulatory pipeline. So my final slide is just really summarizing those milestones which could accelerate our revenue growth even further. Certainly for the COVID product, we are awaiting that final clearance with the US and targeting our first customer contracts. We are launching new kits and seeking regulatory approvals for the sexually transmitted kit, our mosquito-borne kit, and also our enteric protozoan trial in the US. But to summarize where I started, COVID-19 has certainly given us an opportunity to demonstrate our technology around the world. We've received that interest, and it's likely to broaden into the existing multiplex kits that we have, and we look forward to reporting those new contracts in those far bigger markets in the US and Europe. So I will pause there and happily take any questions.
Thanks, John. Just a couple of questions. Common questions in regards to how many kits are you actually selling at the moment, and where's the breakdown of those sales, and what's the margin on those kit sales?
So margin, I'll go backwards. Margin on diagnostic kits are quite high. We are a complete product supplier, so we supply consumables and plasticware as well as the high margin molecular diagnostic tests. So on balance, it's around 65%. We assume those will increase as we gain traction in the higher in those offshore markets, which have certainly a higher selling price in those offshore markets. We, as I said, have scaled up significantly, continue to scale, and anticipate being able to meet the additional demand as we go forward.
There's lots of questions here. So what is Genetics Signature's advantage compared to the antibody tests regarding, COVID-19 test?
Antibody tests are really designed to detect usually a response to the virus. So, and if a patient has antibodies to that virus, the best way to think of it is that window period that listeners might be familiar with, certainly around HIV. It's a molecular test like ours is able to directly detect the genetic information of the virus. So a swab in your throat or nose contains that genetic information, which we detect directly. And so there have been plenty of studies that have shown that that is the frontline test to contain this virus, because the antibody tests take a number of days before they can detect active infections.
And with something like FDA approval, is there a time frame behind that, or are you just subject to the whims of the FDA?
The FDA are inundated. They have said that then they are prioritizing different applications. Ours is a lab-based test. The application is in, but we do have now that 4C exemption, which allows us to supply to select customers in the US, and that is what we will be focused on in the coming weeks and months.
And is that done through partnerships, or? We
have a direct sales force in the US.
Right.
Direct sales and support.
And just more broadly speaking, you know, we've seen the virus kind of return and come back. And do you have a kind of long-term view of how you position yourself given what's going on currently, or is that kind of too difficult to ascertain?
We can speculate, Tim. I don't see the virus going away anytime soon, and I don't think I'm in the minority there. Certainly, we've heard recently in the news of one patient who was reinfected, which says that our own immunity isn't long lasting. Coronavirus traditionally has been very difficult to design a vaccine for. I'm talking about the other strains of coronavirus, not the pandemic strain. I think what will happen is it will become just part of the routine testing. So we do sell a respiratory screening kit, which detects 15 types of viruses, including the milder types of coronavirus. And I think this will be integrated into that sort of broad screen. Certainly, customers that have been tested with our kits have benefited from, they have symptoms, they go to a COVID clinic, and if our lab tests for the complete multiplex, they are at least told you don't have COVID, but you have rhinovirus. And those levels are up to 60% of people coming through the clinic. So it gives the patient comfort that they've got the common cold as opposed to something like COVID-19.
Gotcha. Great. Thanks for your time. That's all we have time for. We've got lots more questions, so we might follow up on ShareCafe with some further content. Thanks, John.
No problem, Tim.
Okay, great. Next up, we have Oncosil Medical, ASX code OSL, market cap 95 million. It's got a 1-year return of around 82%. Oncosil Medical is a Sydney-based medical device company focusing on developing a treatment for patients living with pancreatic cancer, a dreadful cancer. They have developed a medical device called the Oncosil system, and is progressing towards its commercialization. Oncosil's lead product, Oncosil, is a targeted radioactive isotype implanted directly into a patient's pancreatic tumour by endoscopic ultrasound. We have with us, who do we have with us? I'm just double checking that. We have Daniel Kennedy with us. Hi, Daniel. He is both the CEO and Managing Director. Daniel joined Oncosil Medical in 2015 with almost 30 years experience in the global pharmaceutical and medical device industry. Daniel, over to you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks everyone. Delighted to be here to give an update on recent progress with Oncosil Medical. Oncosil Medical is a ASX-listed commercial stage medical device company where we are commercializing a breakthrough implantable radiotherapy device for not just pancreatic cancer, but for also bile duct cancer or distal cholangiocarcinoma. Next slide, please. We'll just run through quickly the investment highlights. It is a proven world-class technology. The Oncosil device is a unique and innovative platform technology where we actually implant radioactive microparticles directly into the tumor of a patient suffering pancreatic cancer, or in bile duct cancer directly into the solid tumor in the bile duct using ultrasound guided endoscopy. If we just focus on pancreatic cancer, there is a clear global opportunity. It's a cancer of a very insidious cancer with incredibly poor prognosis and poor survival rates. And we've identified a greater than a $3 billion market opportunity where this device could become standard of care in combination with systemic chemotherapy. We are ready to commercialize following being granted a CE mark for the United Kingdom and the EU earlier this year. The US FDA has also granted breakthrough device designation for this technology along with the Europeans. We have a highly attractive and scalable operating model as we move into commercialization. And we have a highly experienced board and management led by Dr. Chris Roberts, former CEO of Cochlear. If we move on to the next slide, we'll walk through just some basic facts and figures around the company. As I said earlier, Oncosil Medical is a commercial stage medical device company. Our technology is considered a device rather than a drug. Oncosil's first approved indication is locally advanced unresectable pancreatic cancer. We have also in the last couple of months filed for humanitarian use for the device in bile duct cancer. So we have approvals in the UK, EU, Singapore, and we announced earlier today the approval in Malaysia as well as New Zealand. We are awaiting regulatory clearance in Australia and Hong Kong for the pancreatic indication on the back of our CE marking. As I said earlier, we have breakthrough designation by the UK, EU, and Singaporean authorities, and we have patent protection for this technology in key jurisdictions. If we look at our trial data, we've completed 6 studies, but the pivotal study that's secured CE marking and breakthrough device designation both in the US and in Europe is the PANCO trial, and it's shown excellent local disease control, prolonged overall survival, and a very encouraging surgical resection rate. All of the patients that we have treated in the clinical studies were unresectable or inoperable pancreatic cancer patients. And we're showing 1 in 4 of these patients actually being downstaged so they can actually go into theatre and have their tumours removed. And that is basically the only curative setting possible in pancreatic cancer, is to have the tumour removed. And 85% of patients initially present with unresectable or inoperable tumours. That's what leads to the poor prognosis. Moving forward, on the next slide, we can have a quick look at the technique. We basically have microparticles, which comprise silica and phosphorus. Phosphorus 32 is the radioactive isotope. We mix it with a proprietary diluent. We use ultrasound-guided endoscopy to target the tumour directly, and we insert a needle into that tumour, and we spray the tumour with the microparticles in a uniform manner as best we can under those conditions to essentially irradiate the tumour from within, avoiding external beam issues of external beam coming in, irradiating healthy tissue. No healthy tissue is irradiated using this technique, as the radiation is delivered in a targeted manner inside the tumour. And that is essentially the technique. Moving forward, please. We all know that treating pancreatic cancer is exceedingly difficult. It is very challenging, and existing treatments with pancreatic cancer are ineffectual. And there's been limited advancements in the past 20 years, resulting in very poor prognosis, with an overall median survival of 8.5 months, and 5-year survival is less than 5%. Next slide, please. If we have a wealth of data, and we believe it's quite compelling, and that's formed the basis of our recent approvals in multiple jurisdictions, the CE marking and US FDA breakthrough. But if you walk away from this presentation today, there's 2 key clinical outcomes that I'd like you to note. Oncosil has clinically proven to prolonged overall survival, or median overall survival, in unresectable, locally advanced pancreatic cancer. As we've just seen, 5-year survival is less than 5%. Median overall survival in these patients is 8.5 months. What we're showing with the use of this device is an effective doubling of the length of overall survival to 16 months, and that's based on a data cut from May last year, when we did our final data submission to the European and the US authorities. On the far right-hand side of the slide, you can also see other compelling data, but the key point is, if you apply the Oncosil device based on the clinical data to date with systemic chemotherapy, we're effectively doubling the median overall survival. Moving on to the next slide, just quickly in the interest of time, there is a clear market opportunity in Europe, which includes the United Kingdom after Brexit, of more than 40,000 patients each year who have unresectable locally advanced pancreatic cancer. And we are currently focusing on this group, which comprise 40% of the total pancreatic cancer market. So we can segment the market into resectable, locally advanced and metastatic, and we believe we will play in all of those areas in the fullness of time, but our approved indication is in that locally advanced unresectable cohort. Next slide, please. We talked about earlier that we've identified an addressable market globally of 3 billion in an area of huge unmet need, and listed here you can see quite clearly for the markets where we are approved or seeking approval, how we break that down in terms of the opportunity. So recently we had Singaporean approval. That is a very attractive market for us in Asia, approximately $9 million total addressable market. We announced earlier this morning Malaysian approval. So we're not only focusing on Europe, but we're also focusing on unique and strategically important markets for us in Asia, and we look forward to Australian approval in the near future. Next slide, please. So if we look at the Oncosil commercialization strategy, it's currently in full swing. The clear focus is on first sales in Europe based on the CE mark that we achieved earlier this year. We have a scalable manufacturing operation, and despite the logistical challenges of COVID-19 that some of the earlier presenters referred to, it is challenging, but we are able to make and ship product to Europe to service the first customers that we expect to treat later this year, the patients we expect to treat later this year. We are establishing a direct sales team in Europe currently, and we have multiple sites that we're currently onboarding, and we do expect first revenues in unresectable locally advanced pancreatic cancer in Europe later this year. We have received approvals in Singapore, Malaysia, and New Zealand, and we're currently awaiting Australian and Hong Kong approvals. So we are moving quickly into ASEAN and APAC commercialization. One area I'd like to talk about just very briefly is with this compelling technology, we do realize that there are a number of strategic partnerships in terms of R&D hookups, in-licensing opportunities in other unique geographies, and we're actively pursuing that as the third pillar of our commercialization strategy. And last but by no means least is our focus on the United States. One of our studies, which is currently ongoing, is the ONCPAC-1 study in the United States, also in unresectable locally advanced pancreatic cancer, is ongoing. We have also filed only recently for the humanitarian device exemption for bile duct cancer, and we expect to have an FDA decision, despite them being very busy at the moment handling the COVID crisis. The FDA is indicating to us by end of year we will have an outcome measure, and it's binary. We'll either be granted an approval for bile duct cancer using our technology, and we'll know that by the end of the year. Moving forward, please. Next slide. Just very quickly, so we've completed clinical studies and have approvals in the United Kingdom and Europe, New Zealand, Singapore, and Malaysia, and we are in active phase of finalizing launch preparations, and we would expect to have sales in UK, Europe, and some of these ASEAN and APAC markets later this year. That's a very quick summary there. The United States, we have a dual strategy, one focusing on locally advanced pancreatic cancer, and obviously the bile duct cancer, we're awaiting the outcome from HDE FDA review. Just moving on to the next slide in the interest of time. So Europe, clear path to first revenues. We've done the trials. We have the evidence. We have a compelling argument clinically in an area of huge unmet need. We have the manufacturing and supply chain capability. It is a challenging environment with global logistics, but we remain confident of being able to deliver the doses in time for patients' treatment later this year. We have all the regulatory approvals in place. We have appointed Nigel Lang, former Certex European CEO, to drive our commercialization program. He is building a team currently with a sales force in the United Kingdom and throughout Europe, with a particular focus on Germany, Italy, Spain, and Benelux. We are currently onboarding hospitals, and we are expecting, as I said, first revenues later this year, and we believe we'll have a strong network effect by targeting high-value sites. Next slide, just quickly. This is our repeatable sales model. CE mark allows us to strategically target key sites, and those sites will then pass on their clinical experience to other sites, and we'll move forward. Last few slides, please. Just quickly on the United States, we have a dual approach. One, focusing on pancreatic cancer, which is a very significant opportunity. It's a $500 million opportunity. And with our breakthrough device designation, we believe we have an expedited development and approval pathway moving forward. With bile duct cancer, it's a much more near-term opportunity. It is a very small market in relative terms, but it's a demonstration for us that this device is truly a platform technology for not just pancreatic cancer, but for other solid tumors like bile duct cancer. So that's the US just briefly. And just the next slide, please. We'll skip that one, and we've covered off the US strategy. Just to summarize, earlier this year, we completed the capital raising of a further 19 million. In relative terms, we have pro forma cash of 20 million, which is ample funds for us to move into our commercialization with great gusto. We have made a number of key milestones, achievements since that capital raising in May, such as the appointment of our President for Europe, the HDE filing for bile duct cancer, the regulatory filing in Australia, the approval in Singapore, the approval in Malaysia. And we do have a number of key catalysts coming up, which is of interest. Expected first sales in Europe, regulatory decision on bile duct cancer in the United States, which I believe will be a significant milestone for the company. And obviously getting approval in Australia and approval in Hong Kong. And in the interest of time, Tim, I will pause there for questions.
Thanks, Daniel. A couple of questions here. So with approvals from the EU, UK and US, why would our own TGA take so long to grant approval?
That's a very thorny question, but I'm on the public record that the TGA does require to look at the dossier that we've submitted. They will obviously clearly not wanting to speak on behalf of them, but the data is compelling. It's been approved by multiple jurisdictions, but the system in Australia is that they must review it. So we await their decision. We have our own regulatory system and we have to follow that.
There's some questions here around Certex.
Yeah.
Certex seem to be in a similar market size. Is that right? Is there comparables for Oncosil to draw on here?
There are some comparisons to be made, but the technology is in many ways significantly different. But Certex does give us an indication of what is possible. It's a source of pride for me and my team that the two leading brachytherapy techniques and devices are Australian. Certex pioneered brachytherapy in liver cancer, and I believe we are pioneering brachytherapy in pancreatic cancer. But the biggest difference is the Certex technology, as compelling and as elegant as it is limited to using a discrete blood flow to deliver their microspheres to tumors with a particular focus in the hepatic system or for the liver, where our device is for solid tumors generally. So we have a bigger market potential because we can go from treating theoretically bile duct cancer, liver cancer, which we've done 2 studies in, and of course pancreatic cancer, but theoretically we can treat any solid tumor. So in terms of comparisons, there is some comparisons to be drawn, but there are also, I think, a bigger market opportunity to be captured in the fullness of time.
And how strong is your intellectual property protection around what you do?
As I said just briefly during the presentation, we have full IP coverage in all the key geographies, both for the microparticles, for the use of the technique, and for the proprietary diluent. I think it is exceedingly difficult for anyone to be able to reverse engineer the technology, and in any case, we have it fully covered through requisite IP.
Great. Okay, that's all we have time for, Daniel, but really appreciate that presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Next up, we have Sonata Therapeutics, ASX code CYP, market cap around 109 million. It's got a 1-year return of -40%. Sonata Therapeutics Limited is an Australian stem cell regenerative medicine company that is developing a therapeutic stem cell platform technology called Semiris. I hope that's how you pronounce it. Sonata's Semiris platform stem cell technology is based upon extremely important and versatile stem cells known as MCAs. MCAs are precursor of strong cells, which are at the forefront of a new generation of treatments being investigated for such devastating diseases such as Crohn's and heart disease. We have with us the CEO and Managing Director, Ross McDonald. Ross has over 20 years experience and a track record of success in pharmaceutical and biotechnology businesses. Ross, thank you for your time. Over to you.
Thanks, Tim, and welcome everybody to the session today. The development of stem cells represents one of the major new waves in medicine, and quite simply, stem cells are the body's own mechanisms for repair, recovery, and regeneration. And the ability to harness that allows us to approach the treatment of disease and recovery of diseases in a number of very, very important ways. The particular type of stem cell that is receiving most attention at the moment is a mesenchymal stem cell, or MSC. And these cells represent a promising treatment for a broad range of diseases. And what we're now seeing is that clinical success in a range of clinical trials is creating a very large demand for product. And because these are living cells or living drugs, the manufacture of such products is very complicated. So ultimately, commercial success requires a viable, scalable manufacturing solution that ensures a very consistent product. And we've just seen recently some very informative news from the FDA about that particular issue. And the FDA's reminded manufacturers in this area to ensure that their products are consistent. And that is where Sonata's Cymerus platform technology for the manufacture of MSCs provides a very, very important solution. So moving to the next slide, I'll explain a little bit about how our technology works and how it differs from the current approach or the conventional process to manufacturing MSC-based therapeutics. The conventional process is indicated there at the top of the slide, and it involves accessing cells from donors, human donors who are prepared to donate mostly bone marrow or fat tissue, from which the product, the MSC product, is purified and isolated. The product is then expanded in tissue culture when sufficient quantities are made, so cells divide 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 and so on, and when sufficient quantities are obtained through that manufacturing process, they're isolated, and then the product is derived and used in the patient. This process, as I mentioned, requires multiple donors. And of course, since every donor is different, we're all individuals, there is no ability to ensure consistency because everybody has different MSCs, and the properties of those MSCs have been shown to differ from different donors, a point that the FDA, as I said, has recently expanded upon. The Sonata process, which is covered by our patents, involves a completely different transformative approach where we use cells derived from a single donor in a one-time donation to derive what's called an induced pluripotent stem cell, or an iPSC, from which our finished product can be manufactured, ensuring, as we only use one donor, that we have a highly consistent, reproducible, and very potent product. And ultimately, this process assures regulatory agencies around the world of consistency and quality, and ultimately effectiveness in clinical trials. And that's borne out too in potency, where our product requires typically only about 2 doses per patient versus much higher doses, which in the bone marrow derivation or adipose tissue derivation strategies, which of course is a huge cost of goods advantage and practical advantage for our technology. If we move to the next slide, we have now translated this manufacturing technology into clinical trials and clinical development. And of course, ultimately demonstrating that your product is effective in the clinic, in the disease targets in which you're pursuing, is the key to commercial success. Thus far, we've completed a very successful clinical trial in graft versus host disease, a condition that arises in cancer patients who have had a bone marrow transplant. And that technology, or that product, has now been licensed globally to a major pharmaceutical company, Fujifilm, who are now pursuing further development of that product at their cost. We're moving forward with a phase 3 clinical trial in osteoarthritis, a program in COVID-19, which I'll talk more about in a moment, critical limb ischemia, for which we have approval, and multiple other preclinical development pathways, which we can then produce or move forward into clinical trial very soon. Moving to the next slide, to show where the valuation opportunity lies in an investment in Sonata, I think it's important to give you some indication of comparables. I've got a couple of companies here who are developing cell therapy products based on the iPSC strategy. One, Blue Rock, was acquired recently, or a year or so ago, in a major acquisition. Previously, it was a private company acquired for $1 billion. Fate Therapeutics, a US-listed cell therapy company, also using iPSCs as their manufacturing strategy. And an Australian company that many investors will be familiar with, Mesoblast, which is developing mesenchymal stem cells. Their market cap now is over $2 billion US. They have multiple targets, but they're relying on the bone marrow derivation strategy that I mentioned before. So if you're looking at where upside opportunities lie, it's very clear here from these other comparable companies that there's a heck of a lot of blue sky ahead for Sonata, who is now in multiple late-stage clinical trial with a very, very attractive manufacturing solution. If we move to the next slide, ultimately the driver for value for biotech companies is clinical data. To be able to show that the company's product is effective in particular diseases. And in our case, we've conducted a clinical trial in graft versus host disease, which is a very severe condition arising in bone marrow transplant patients, wherein we demonstrated outstanding efficacy. These patients essentially have no option. They have failed the only course of treatment available to them, which is corticosteroids. And in that clinical trial, on the left-hand panel there, you can see that we achieved all efficacy endpoints. The complete response in these patients 100 days after they received the product of 53%, and a survival rate at that time point of greater than 87%. The high response rates that we've demonstrated there would be consistent with an approvable product should we move forward to phase 3. And of course, that's now in the hands of our partner, Fujifilm. On the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see some recently released data from a 2-year follow-up of these patients, wherein we assessed survival 2 years after the completion of the study. And we're delighted to see that we had a 60% survival rate. Now that may not seem great, but bear in mind these patients have a very grim outlook. And on the lower right-hand side there, you'll see that typically with standard of care, we would expect to see only around 17% survival. And compared with other MSC products, our 60% survival is also very, very interesting because it's much higher than those other products have reported. Most importantly as well, we saw no safety signals and no adverse events. Moving to the next slide, see how we intend to build shareholder value. And ultimately continuing to drive forward clinical development and generate clinical data to demonstrate safety and efficacy is of course the main pathway for biotech and pharmaceutical companies. But Sonata also has a license-driven or partner-driven strategy, which we are very aggressively pursuing, and our deal with Fujifilm is one such example of success in that area. And ultimately also strategic exits or mergers could also be a way to build and derive shareholder value. And in fact, last year, Sonata was the subject of a takeover bid mounted by Sumitomo Dainippon of Japan at $2 per share. We decided not to proceed with that at the time for a number of reasons, but that leaves the company still in a great place with our deal with Fujifilm, as you can see on the right-hand side there, producing, if ultimately successful, a very substantial revenue flow to the company, in addition to the $4 million Australian in equity that we've already received at a 35% premium, and a nearly $3 million milestone payment that we received late last year when the deal was signed. Most importantly too, such a transaction validates the company's technology. It shows that a global pharmaceutical company, having done its due diligence and completed its review of the technology, has decided that it's worthy of investment. And that is certainly a very, very useful data point for investors in this complicated space. Moving on to the next slide. I mentioned briefly that we have a phase 3 in osteoarthritis soon to get underway. This is a very large clinical trial in patients with osteoarthritis. 440 patients will be randomized one-on-one to receive either placebo or our product. So it's a very well-designed trial, and with the power to demonstrate whether or not MSCs ultimately are effective in treating this particularly challenging condition. As many of you will be aware, osteoarthritis is a progressive disease that really can only be controlled by means of pain relief and then ultimately surgery. So using a product such as an MSC to intervene and potentially reverse the course of this disease would be a fantastic outcome. It's now been approved by the ethics committees, and we await the final announcement by the state government of New South Wales that the restrictions around trial recruitment have been lifted. This not only affects Sonata, but many other companies. It's a very large commercial opportunity, over $11 billion, as most investors will be aware. Next slide, a very topical program at the moment is in COVID-19. MSCs have been shown to be potentially useful in treating patients with severe complications arising from infection with SARS-CoV-2, and this trial will be in patients who are admitted to intensive care wards with compromised lung function. It builds on some very exciting preclinical data we've already demonstrated in 3 different areas that are highly relevant to these patients. And it's important to note that in these patients, it's not so much the infection itself that's causing the problems, it's the body's reaction, the immune reaction to the infection. So bringing that immune response under control is the key to, we believe, to success in getting these patients out of ICUs and back into recovery. It's a 24-patient clinical study, and recruitment is now open for that trial in New South Wales. Moving to the next slide, the wrap-up. So in summary, Sonata's technology is a scalable, globally applicable technology for the manufacture of this very exciting type of stem cell and MSC. We've got ticks in the major boxes of importance to investors. Successful clinical trial results where we have shown the product works in patients with a disease as opposed to healthy volunteers. We've got a clear pipeline of high potential target areas, so multiple shots on goal, and an attractive licensing driven business model, which we have already executed on in our partner deal with Fujifilm. And as the business of regenerative medicine continues to grow, Sonata is extremely well placed to capitalize on that with our technology. So thanks, Tim. Open for questions.
Thanks, Ross. Just a couple of questions. We look like we've got a couple of people who know what they're talking about in this space. So Mesoblast has kind of a lock on the IP in this space. Is that correct? And kind of how do you move around that?
Well, it's not for me to comment on Mesoblast's IP, but Mesoblast was one of the first movers in this area, and their technology, their intellectual property, is mostly around the process for purifying and isolating MSCs from bone marrow. Our technology takes a completely different approach to that. We don't require isolating any cells from anybody's bone marrow, and so therefore we have a completely different strategy.
And just the kind of the partnerships, is that the way you move forward for distribution, and do you kind of lose margin as you do that moving forward?
I think, as Bianca pointed out in her opening remarks, building a fully integrated pharmaceutical company requires an enormous amount of capital, and that includes getting all the way to market, so building sales and marketing resource in major markets around the world. So ultimately, a company in the Australian context is better served by accessing the capital, the resources, the expertise, and the global outreach that comes with established pharmaceutical companies. And that's why we did a deal with Fujifilm. Yes, we do leave money on the table because obviously we're not capturing full value of the technology as if we were selling it ourselves. But on the other hand, we spread the risk, and of course, we considerably spread the cost.
Yeah, understood, Ross. One last question. So what's the main difference to your cells and those of the many other companies in the space?
Well, that's a very good question. Mesenchymal stem cells are broadly defined by a number of characteristics, but there clearly have been established major differences between MSCs that are isolated from different individuals, that are cultured over various periods of time, and various other means in which an MSC can be defined. Ultimately, whether those changes in characteristics translate to differences in clinical outcome in patients in whom they're used is an open question. What we know about our product is that it is very, very effective and very potent. And I think that's the most important thing for Sonata and our investors.
Great, thanks for your time, Ross. Have a nice weekend. That's all we have time for, and appreciate your time.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. Next up, we have MedLab Clinical, ASX code MDC, market cap of around $44 million, 1 year return of negative 67%. It's a volatile sector we're in at the moment. MedLab Clinical is a medical research and development facility researching and formulating novel biotherapeutics to improve health outcomes in early to moderate stage chronic diseases, such as kidney disease and pre-diabetes and obesity. We have with us the CEO and Dr. Sean Hall. Sean has over 20 years experience in sales and development, as well as early drug discovery in Australia, Asia, and the US. He has led and inspired his teams to author multiple patents, write peer review articles, and deliver lectures at scientific conferences. Sean, we appreciate your time on this Friday afternoon. I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me for the next 10 or so minutes. If I can, I'll just jump, thank you. So essentially, we are a biotech and we focus on chronic illnesses, and two specific chronic illnesses that are lead candidates in what we do would be pain, and the other would be depression. And during COVID, we get a sense on how big mental health is. The beauty about MedLab now is whilst a lot of our work focuses on developing tomorrow's drugs, we are in market now and we're building revenue from a nutraceutical division that we have. Some of you who know me will know that I have a lot of legacy in the nutraceutical space here and abroad, and they're available through Australian pharmacy. We get into legal and regulated compassionate use programs that are patient payable. And in one particular one, the Nanobus product cited there is part of that. And we move into early phase partnering. You've heard the CEOs before me talk about diminishing risk and building and opening global markets. Outside of that, one of the core programs we undertake in MedLab is developing this uniqueness. And for us, it's around delivery platform development. How do we make something work better in the human body? And if I can, next slide, please. And in doing so, we can articulate a drug that has better safety profiles, quicker uptake, and can challenge or rival standard care we have now. Notwithstanding, our lead drug program is known as Nanobus. It is a focal point for the company, and we have done clinical work here where we have shown safety, efficacy, and tolerability, and we are in phase 3 development across Australia, the US, and the UK now. We have done our pre-IND meetings with the US FDA. We have a pretty good sense on how this is going to work. And this program itself is actually subject to a fair bit of patient payable compassionate use under the Australian Special Access Scheme. The intent on this drug, very simply, is to target bone metastases in advanced cancer patients. This is a primary source of pain. Standard care is opioids. If we go to the next slide, please. The general takeaway is whilst opioids are widespread in their use for advanced cancer pain, generally for the majority of patients, they simply do not work. That being, they do not alleviate pain or alleviate it to such a point that the patient can have some normality in life. So in looking at Western medical models, we adopt what's called the World Health Organization pain scale. And it basically tells a doctor like me how to upskill a patient into mixed or heavy opioids, depending on how we rate their pain. Nanobus's therapeutic entry point is to get people just before they progress into opioids. So medically, we refer to them as opioid naive. And in doing so, we can significantly alter the course of that patient's trajectory on opioid use, subsequent dependence, and abuse. Next slide, please. So this is Nanobus. Our work to date has been done at the Royal North Shore Hospital here in Sydney. Our lead principal investigator is Professor Stephen Clark. He is considered highly in oncology, not just here, but also abroad. We have moved through the traditional gates where we have done clinical studies. We're also doing real world observational studies. We have done full CMC, that's your quality manufacturing, analytical and validation packages. We have done our pre-IND meetings with the US FDA. And here and now, we are finalizing our documentation for a multi-center phase 3 trial that will see us Australia, UK, and the US. And subsequent to that, there'll be a number of significant catalysts that over the next short few years should see us through to full drug application in the US itself. Next slide, please. In developing a program like Nanobus, we try and fast track where we can. We work very closely with regulatory agencies, and we find that whether it's TGA here or FDA in the US, this open dialogue allows us to champion conventional wisdom in standard trial design and trial movements. And it allows us to not just save time, but save money in the fact that we can springboard forward based on their acceptance on what we do. The second part to that is core to Nanobus is a delivery platform that we use, which we call NanoCell. And I'll touch on that ever so briefly shortly. But it, as you can see, is obviously heavily protected under patents here and abroad. Next slide, please. Some value points. We look at Nanobus as a fast-acting non-opioid alternative, specifically for breast and prostate cancers with bone metastases, but this is also now being opened up to lung. Currently, we have about 300 Australian doctors, that's nationwide, utilizing the drug authorized federally under a compassionate program. And as I said before, our regulatory models are going to be moving us into the Northern Hemisphere quite soon. Next slide, please. Give you an idea of the sense of what this SAS or this special access scheme is, this compassionate program. We look at accumulated bottles that we dispense through this program. We use this program to develop advocacy for the product and key opinion leaders for tomorrow. But even under observational data, which is all ethically approved and TGA approved, we see results in what we're following or what we're tracking that are very consistent to what we see in the clinical settings. And in that, we see significant reductions in patient-reported pain. We see significant reductions in the amount of morphine that our patients need as they progress through what's left of their life. As you can imagine, a lot of these patients are entering near or final stages. Next slide, please. A quick spin-off to Nanobus allowed us to increase our cannabis portfolio. This is where I pause for a moment and I say we're really not a pot stock. Cannabis to us is an active pharmaceutical ingredient, not dissimilar from an antibiotic or insulin that you would know. But what you have here is examples of our work where we've spun off from a lead program without detrimenting it, been able to place it into revenue producing markets here and abroad. Next slide, please. I touched on before by saying that core to Nanobus was a delivery platform. We're big on delivery platform work. We use a lot of nanoparticles. We've produced a delivery platform that's been articulated through University of Sydney to validate our work that has very high bioavailability. And ultimately what it does is it solves drug solubility problems. Now, for some of you, you're sitting there going, what is that? Drug solubility problems relates to how a drug will disintegrate, considering that you're swallowing it, and get uptaken by the body. Most drugs that you consume, you ingest, are very poorly absorbed. we can change that quite extensively and scale up production very easily by the use of the nanocell delivery platform. Next slide, please. Give you a quick look at what we're doing at MedLab. We're using the delivery platform, I'm sorry, it's small, across 23 other generic medicines now, because one of the go-to markets for that is the ability to repurpose the generic and subsequently breathe some level of patency back into some of these generics that we see here and now. Next slide, please. On the nutraceutical front and in the mental health area, we have a product that we've put through the gates of depression trials. We have just completed a phase 2 trial with University of Technology Queensland. We are awaiting results, but this is just to give you an idea on how we invest in programs moving forward that ultimately, once we have that market approval from the drug regulator, opens the market potential up to what we can say, what we can do, and how we can globalize that movement going on. Just in the era of time, I might skip 2 slides and go to our current revenue slide. Thank you. Most of our sales are here in Australia. We have very little export business, but even with COVID here and now, we are moving stronger and stronger into international markets. And we actually have partnership programs for this year starting up literally next week. Next slide, please. Pin to our underscore, obviously, is we drive the R&D to drive product, to drive evidence, which ultimately leads to commercialization. Quickly here, you can see that a number of our programs are oncology related, or they are, or they are delivery platform related. Last slide, please. Investment summary, thank you. Just from an investment summary, and I'll stop after this slide. Our trial work leads to multiple value creation catalysts and subsequent news flow. You're about to see a lot more come out as we step forward into US territories and we step forward into UK territories. Early globalization avenues are underway. We've seen that with some of the cannabinoid products this year alone. We focus on very significant unmet patient needs. So we have a very strong health policy conversation that goes forward with the regulators, very strong patent portfolio, a wonderful and experienced leadership team. And the big thing is whilst we're doing research, ladies and gentlemen, we're generating revenue now. I'm going to pause there and open to questions.
Thank you, Sean. Some questions here. So how successful have companies who alter delivery methods for drugs been in the past?
Yeah, really good question. Actually, a number have been very successful. Look, it's biotech, so you have a risk of failure, but then when you do get it, the prize is significant. Delivery technologies for drug improvement have been around, wow, most of my life. And a lot of the medicines that we take for consideration today have had a delivery platform employed to them to make them safer or easier for a doctor to administer to a patient. Moving forward, as we are not generating new antibiotics, as there is less and less blockbusters coming out, you'll find a lot of the pharma partners that have significant generic portfolios are now looking to innovations in platform to keep life or breathe new life into their existing sales portfolios.
Now, it can take a long time to get into the US market. So what's your kind of plan for other regions globally and then to the United States?
Okay, so at the moment we are, where do I start? We are involved in a number of different types of partnering programs at the moment. There is one that spearheads or comes to a head rather as of Monday. Our goal at the end of the day is preferably someone other than us will take it into these larger markets. So partnering is key. Aggressively, we have to do that. COVID restrictions, time differences and so forth are making that a little bit more difficult than first thought, but we have initiatives that are starting up as of next week that I'm hoping as we move forward will gel in the near future. The other thing is once we get on record with FDA INDs and they're forthcoming, we anticipate them before Christmas this year, there is a different type of public record that goes out to people that watch that new IND space as well. So between news flow here, news flow we generate in the US, in the UK and in the Euros, we hope that we can pull out a worthy partner.
Okay, and just one last question. So who are your main competitors in this space?
Believe it or not, a number of people will look at us and go, well, you do cannabis, therefore you're a pot stock, so therefore your competitors are the pot stocks. But I think that that's far from the truth. And unfortunately, the devil is in the detail. Most pot stocks are leaf touchers. They grow it, they bottle it, they sell it. Right? We're looking at building a regulated product with approved market claims, patents behind it, so we get some market dominance for 15 plus years. In that, I think the best comp you could probably look at is a NASDAQ listed company called GW Pharmaceuticals. They're, last I checked, worth around about 3-point-something billion US. They had 9-12 months ago, one CBD product approved by the FDA for a very tight indication. And subsequent to that, about a month ago, they got a second indication on that. And they're producing revenues in excess of 100 million US per quarter.
And those products do take a long time to get to market, though. That's correct, isn't it?
That's true. That's true. Look, if I can be blunt, we're looking at doing full drug filing in around about 3 years. I know to most people that's I want to slit my throat kind of mentality. But in that, there are significant catalysts that move with us. Two of those catalysts is the use of cannabis for compassionate grounds in those Northern Hemisphere regions for ethical use.
Understood. Thank you, Sean. Thanks for your time. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you again.
Cheers. Thank you.
That's all we have time for today. Now, if you want a recording of this webinar, we will be sending out individual recordings of each company over the weekend. If not on Monday, because you're registered, you'll receive those recordings. If not, you can search for those on ShareCafe. All the webinar recordings are on ShareCafe. Just look in the right-hand corner on the website, type in the stock code or the stock name, and you'll find all the information on the company there. Thanks for your time again, and have a good weekend.